All right, so California Senator Dianne Feinstein has officially made her somewhat comeback after a 2 month hiatus, 2 months of being MIA from her job within the Senate and representing her constituents with a case of shingles, which I guess now she's maybe partially recovered from. Kind of hard to tell from these initial pictures that we've gotten from her return. I mean, she's definitely looking pretty rough here. But then on top of the shingles part of it, she also, I mean, based on all of the reports that we've gotten previously and more that I'm going to get into in this video, she has dementia. Okay, now listen, on like a personal angle, it's not a personal attack or anything like that. I've had grandparents who have had dementia and Alzheimer's. It's a terrible thing. It's not something I would wish personally on my worst enemy. Okay, so with that being put aside, right, you have a job to do. Okay, it's your job to be one of the senators from the largest state in the entire country. She represents like 40 million people from California, and she's just not able to do her job. Whether or not you have shingles or you've recovered from shingles, if you have dementia, just get out. I mean, you gotta leave. And at this point, it's gotten so bad that I honestly don't even think that Dianne Feinstein is capable of recognizing what is happening right now and that she could actually make the decision to leave her seat. So somebody around her clearly has to step in, clearly has to make something happen, or else she's going to end up just like, I guess, dropping dead on the floor of the Senate one day. I mean, it's pretty dark. It's honestly, it's simultaneously like depressing, but also simultaneously just like absurd and ridiculous that we're even having to have this conversation. I mean, we're talking about Dianne Feinstein. She's older than the Golden Gate Bridge. She's literally older. Here you go. Golden Gate Bridge. May 27th, 1937. Dianne Feinstein, June 22nd, 1933. She's older than the Golden Gate Bridge, okay? At that point, man, just leave, just retire. You're worth millions of dollars, okay? We're gonna get to some of her corruption here in a second. You're worth millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. You are 1,000 years old. Go home, take a nap. You don't need to be here. I mean, what is this even about? Her legacy? I mean, if she even had a decent legacy, which I don't even think that that's necessarily accurate, but if she did, she's tarnishing it herself by doing this. And the people around her are helping to tarnish whatever legacy she does have by allowing this to take place. So we had some new reports here, just as a reminder in terms of how far gone Dianne Feinstein actually is right now. So here from Politico, this was a really interesting piece, and I recommend you guys go read the entirety of it, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of different things that stood out to me. So basically, a staffer that used to work, he got fired, but a staffer that used to work for Dianne Feinstein came out and was basically exposing the fact that she's not making any of the decisions within, you know, her politics. It's basically just the upper levels of her staffers that are making all of these decisions for her. And he had a couple revealing statements here. So let's see if we can pick some of these out. So the first thing that stood out to me, they say here, what led to his firing earlier that month was a matter of some dispute. In a termination letter, Feinstein's chief of staff wrote that Perley, which is this guy's name, had lost his job simply because he had stopped showing up to work and had repeatedly been corresponding with constituents on behalf of the senator without first getting approval from his manager. Perley, meanwhile, thought he was being punished for telling hard truths about Feinstein. It was obvious to him that her mental faculties were dimming and that she might be going senile. Perley also thought that the Senate office should be focusing more on constituent services to actually, you know, do the work of representing your constituents, right? But they continue saying things had come to a head 2 weeks earlier. On a phone call with the other members of the office, Perley had let loose, airing concerns for what felt like 10 minutes. He talked about the coworkers who had touched his hair while he sat at his desk, how the senator hadn't even learned his name or spoken to him despite 5 years of service to her, how the chief of staff seemed to be operating as a shadow senator since the actual one was, in his opinion, no longer mentally there. And he adds on here, I mean, I guess he thinks that she's, you know, openly racist, or at least behind the scenes pretty racist, and doesn't give a shit about black people. He said that she cares more about her dog Kirby than she does about black people. But I mean, again, the things that stand out here, again, the chief of staff for Dianne Feinstein is operating as a shadow senator because she does not have the mental capabilities in order to be able to do the job that she was elected to do. And we had another aspect that was also in that same article, as pointed out here from Ken Klippenstein. He says Dianne Feinstein mistook Tim Scott for Raphael Warnock. okay? And this isn't the only example of this, right? We've had plenty of other senators who aren't willing, because they're cowards, they aren't willing to come out and openly discuss how far gone Dianne Feinstein actually is behind the scenes. But, when they're not having to be quoted directly and they can say it anonymously, we've seen probably dozens of different senators and members of the House who say that she forgot their name. She doesn't know at times what she's actually voting on and what the bill is about or what they're having conversations about. They say sometimes that they'll have conversations with her and then a day later she'll completely forget that they had that conversation. I mean, this is so clear, so obvious, it's not in dispute, and yet we're still having to deal with this. And again, it's not even just that she's not representing her constituents, it's also that she's holding up the Senate. She is preventing potentially dozens of different judicial nominees from being put in place because of how close the split right now is in the Judiciary Committee. So there was also this interview that was done by Jake Tapper with Dick Durbin, who I believe is the head of the Senate Judiciary. He's a Democrat, and he is going to somehow pull off an seemingly impossible feat here and get outflanked from the left by Jake Tapper. Okay, imagine getting embarrassed by Jake Tapper. Let's just go ahead and listen to a little bit of this.
There's a challenge in the Senate Judiciary Committee to do our business. For example, you raised the question of a subpoena, and I haven't reached any conclusion on that. But if we go down that path, we need a majority on the committee. Right now, with her absence, it's a 10-10 committee, and the majority is not there. And a proxy vote doesn't count in this circumstance. So it's a complicated situation. I hope she does what's best for her and her family and the state of California and makes a decision soon as to whether she's coming back.
I mean, all due respect, sir, you and your fellow Democrats were very ginger and very polite when it came to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and not pushing her to retire when you had a Democratic majority in the Senate. How'd that work out for you? How'd that work out for Roe v. Wade?
Well, I can tell you that you can play these out and try to guess what the Supreme Court opinions resulting from it will be. The bottom line is, though, we have in the past had members of the Senate, I can think of a handful as I'm sitting here, Democrats and Republicans, who've been absent because of medical conditions for lengthy periods of time. I want to treat Dianne Feinstein fairly. I want to be sensitive to her family situation and her personal situation. And I don't want to say that she's going to be put under more pressure than others have been in the past.
Okay, I mean, how pathetic is that shit? All right, you are getting absolutely obliterated by Jake Tapper. Okay, never thought I'd say it in my life, but credit to Jake Tapper there for actually having a good comparison, a good analogy there with Roe v. Wade and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who famously refused to retire in the Obama administration. And then what do you know? She ends up dying under Donald Trump and he gets to pick her replacement. And then we end up with the overturning of Roe v. Wade. I mean, these types of things have consequences, right? He's talking about this so flippantly, so casually, as if like this is just like his family friend. And he's like, oh, I want to respect her decision and her family's decision and whatever, and whenever they come to that conclusion, we're good with that. What are you talking about, dude? You are the head of this committee. You got a fucking job to do, okay? You can't just be dancing around and waiting for months and months on end in order to be able to do these things. And again, as they pointed out there towards the beginning of this clip, it's not just about even the judicial committees or the judicial nominees that aren't able to be put forward, which is pretty important. They have consequential decisions around the country depending on how many you're able to get in. But on top of that, you also have these massive stories of corruption that have been coming out on Clarence Thomas and other Supreme Court justices, where the moment for putting actual pressure on doing something about that is right now. You're not going to get another chance potentially in the future unless some other explosive story comes out. This will in all likelihood probably just fade back into the distance, right? People are going to forget about it. We're going to have the 24-hour news cycle and people are going to move on to some other crazy stuff that's going on, right? You need to be doing something about this. Clarence Thomas, with the corruption allegations that we have seen come out with his connections to the billionaire Harlan Crow, basically taking a $500,000 super yacht joyrides around Southeast Asia with this guy on these massive vacations and taking all of these gifts, and he's paying for his mother's house and all of these different things that he didn't even disclose. Okay, that's impeachable stuff, right? Clarence Thomas has completely, if you wanted to pretend as if the Supreme Court deserved any semblance of legitimacy in the the eyes of the American people, which it really doesn't deserve that anyways, but you are shredding any actual credibility that even just average Americans see in the Supreme Court, both with decisions like Roe v. Wade, but also just with rampant corruption where nothing is being done about it. And there was another quote here that wasn't in this clip, but this same guy, when he was asked about whether or not he was actually going to move forward with putting consequences on Clarence Thomas, or even having Democrats looking into getting firm enforceable standards for conduct for the Supreme Court, because they don't have any actual code of ethics that's enforceable for SCOTUS, even though they have it for lower courts, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But I mean, he's talking about this so casually, and in another one of these clips, he basically came out and said, history will decide how Clarence Thomas is going to be judged. History? What are you talking about? History. We're here right now, okay? We're in this moment right now. Something's got to be done about that. But instead, they're just sitting on their hands. They're just accepting this and just letting Dianne Feinstein and everybody around her just do whatever they want and completely pause the government functions that she's supposed to be doing, right? And so I think we had a good take here from Jay Willis. He says, and this was in response to an even more recent story about Clarence Thomas's corruption and connections with Leonard Leo. But they say, unless Democrats get it together, these 2 years will be a generational missed opportunity, a Senate majority, a blizzard of stories about SCOTUS corruption, real momentum for reform, and Democrats are just sending polite letters that the court stuffs in the trash. And he's 100% correct. And then on top of all of this, I mean, again, some people are going to have sympathy for Dianne Feinstein on a personal level. Sure, that's completely fine. You're an elected representative. The conversation is not about whether or not it's sad that she has dementia or that she had shingles, I guess, right? It's not about feeling bad for her. It's about you are an elected representative. You have a job to do. You are not capable of doing that job, regardless of whether or not you just beat the shingles. You can't beat the dementia. That's not going to get better. You're not going to be cured from that, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, this is very simple. But on top of all of this, I mean, again, I don't have any sympathy for Dianne Feinstein's legacy, as people are pretending like that should be protected and, praised or anything like that. As pointed out here by Unusual Whales, he has a full rundown here of some of the massively corrupt insider trading that Dianne Feinstein and those immediately surrounding her have been participating in. Again, she is worth over $200 million. You're 89 years old. You're older than the Golden Gate Bridge. You're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Why do you even feel the need? Why would you even want to be in this position at this point? I mean, it's completely insane. Just a couple of these to highlight them. He says, Feinstein reportedly attended COVID hearings by the CDC in early January of 2020. Afterwards, her husband sold between $1.5 and $6 million in stock of Allogene Therapeutics, amongst others. The stock then collapsed shortly afterwards, and Feinstein was, of course, cleared by the DOJ. And again, we went through all of these allegations, we went through all of this stock trading corruption, and we never got anything passed through Congress to actually ban them from engaging in this type of rampant insider trading. All we had was that clip of Nancy Pelosi where she came out and was defending it and saying, we're just participating in the free market system. I mean, it's just such ridiculous, grotesque levels of corruption. And Dianne Feinstein is absolutely, not immune to those kinds of allegations as well. So, I mean, there you have it. We're going to have to see what happens over the next couple of days. Is she even going to be able to show up for a vote? I mean, again, she was looking pretty rough when she pulled up the first time in this wheelchair. It'll be interesting. I'd honestly like to see Dianne Feinstein be forced to sit down and just do a 30-minute interview with somebody right now, a good journalist who's going to ask tough questions that any other senator would also, should be subjected to, and just see if she's able to do it. I mean, clearly she is not fit to serve in this position, and everybody who's around her, who is propping her up, who is allowing this to continue, and that doesn't just include her staffers, it also includes Dick Durbin, it also includes especially Chuck Schumer, who's the leader of the Senate. You all are enabling this, and it's honestly grotesque and disgusting.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.